Now, this is a hard question, and I feel uncomfortable asking it, but I will. There's so much debate about if Alex hadn't done the things that he had done, would he still have been a great player? And watching you play, my gut reaction is yes, I think you would have been. Would you have been the same player if those things didn't happen?
I think so, Michael, and that's really the most disappointing part about some of my unbelievably stupid decisions. If you think about the arc of my career, arguably you can say that my best 2 years were at 19 and at 40. And very rarely do you have that in a player. And I love the game, I study the game, and it makes my mistakes sometimes where I lose a lot of sleep. But the bottom line is I made a mistake. I try to do my best to learn from that. And really the thing that I'm most proud of over the last 2 years is me mending relationships with, again, I've always said it, the commissioner's office, Hal Steinbrenner, my teammates, my coaches, my managers, people like yourself who obviously...
He's a cheating legend, and Alex Rodriguez knows that better than almost anyone. Alex Rodriguez was one of the most gifted baseball players the world has ever seen. He had the swing, the fame, the money, and the stage. But the man who was about to break down baseball's biggest cheaters spent years lying about being one himself. He is not judging from the outside. He is judging from inside the wreckage. Today we look at 6 players and one team that turned baseball into a story fans could not fully trust anymore. We will ask the question that still bothers fans today. How did so many of baseball's biggest stars become symbols of cheating? And why did fans keep watching anyway? I am Mason, and this is Baseball Icon. And before the story gets even uglier, use the hype feature and give this video some hype, because baseball history is full of moments fans still argue about today. One of those moments did not even happen that long ago. It happened with the team that A-Rod himself called out on live television. We will get to that team soon, because it might be the strangest case on this whole list. But first, let's count down the 6 biggest cheaters who changed the game forever, starting with number 6. Number 6 on this list is a story that is really about 2 players at once, Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa. In the summer of 1998, these 2 men gave baseball something it badly needed: joy. Baseball had been struggling, fans were tired, and many had stopped paying attention. Then, McGwire and Sosa started hitting home runs at a pace nobody had seen before. Every night, people turned on the television just to see if one of them would hit another one. It felt like a race. It felt exciting. It felt like baseball was alive again. Kids who had never cared about the sport suddenly knew both of their names. Newspapers put them on the front page, not just the sports page. For a few months, it felt like the whole country was watching the same story at the same time. That kind of moment does not happen very often in sports. McGwire ended up breaking the single-season home run record that year, and Sosa was right there with him the whole way. Fans cheered for both of them. It felt pure. It felt like something special was happening in front of their eyes. But years later, the story changed. McGwire admitted that he had used steroids during his career, including during that magical summer. That admission landed hard. The home runs that had brought so much joy were suddenly viewed in a different light. Around the same time, Sosa's name kept coming up in connection with performance-enhancing drugs as well. He never had the same kind of clear admission that McGwire gave, but the suspicion followed him for years and damaged how people remembered his power numbers. Together, McGwire and Sosa became something bigger than 2 players. They became a symbol. They were proof that fans could fall in love with a moment, only to find out later that the moment may not have been completely real. For a generation of baseball fans, that summer of 1998 was the first time they felt that gap between what they saw and what was actually true. It would not be the last time. Think about what that summer actually meant to people. Parents took their kids to games just to say they were there. People who normally only watched the World Series were checking the score every single night. Sports shows led with the home run race ahead of almost everything else happening in the world of sports. It was the kind of story that made strangers talk to each other in line at the grocery store. That is rare. That kind of shared excitement does not happen very often. And when it does, people remember it for the rest of their lives. That is part of what makes the later admissions sting so much. It was not just 2 players whose numbers got questioned. It was a shared memory for millions of people that suddenly came with an asterisk attached. McGwire eventually admitted his steroid use in a tearful interview years after he had retired, and he apologized directly to fans for the era he he had been part of. Sosa never gave that same kind of clear admission, but his name kept showing up in reports and investigations connected to performance-enhancing drugs. And that constant shadow followed him for the rest of his career and into retirement. Neither man ever came close to the Hall of Fame, despite numbers that once seemed like a guaranteed ticket. For a lot of fans, this pair represents the moment they first learned that the most exciting story in sports can also be the least honest one. Number 5 on this list is Pete Rose, and his story is different from almost everyone else on this list. Pete Rose received a lifetime ban from baseball after investigations concluded that he gambled on Major League Baseball games, including games that involved his own team. With most of the names on this list, the question fans ask is about the body. Was the home run real, or did a drug help create it? With Pete Rose, the question is about something even bigger. Was the game itself honest? When a player or manager bets on the outcome of games their own team is playing, it raises a question that baseball cannot allow to exist. Did every decision on the field happen because it gave the team the best chance to win? Or could something else have been shaping those choices the whole time? We are not adding outside details here because the facts are simple and serious enough on their own. A lifetime ban is the harshest punishment baseball can give a person. It does not just end a career. It cuts that person off from the sport completely for the rest of their life. Pete Rose's case sits in this countdown as a reminder that cheating in baseball does not always look the same. Sometimes it is about chemicals. Sometimes it is about technology. And sometimes it is about gambling on the very games you are supposed to be trying to win. Different sin, but the same broken trust. What makes this case stand out from the others on this list is the size of the punishment compared to almost anything else baseball has ever handed down. A suspension, even a long one, eventually ends. A player can come back, play again, and try to rebuild his name on the field. A lifetime ban does not work that way. It does not just take away playing time. It takes away the chance to ever be part of the game again in any official way for the rest of that person's life. Baseball treats gambling on its own games as one of the most serious violations that exists. More serious in some ways than many of the chemical scandals on this list. The reasoning behind that is simple to understand, even for a young fan. Fans need to believe that the outcome of a game is decided purely by who plays better that day. The moment gambling enters the picture, even the appearance of it, that belief gets damaged in a way that is very hard to repair. Pete Rose's story shows that baseball does not just worry about what happens to a player's body. It also worries deeply about what happens to the honesty of the competition itself. And it has shown that it is willing to hand out its harshest punishment to protect that idea. Number 4 on this list is Roger Clemens, and his story is the pitching side of the same era that produced so many of the other names here. While fans often think about home run hitters when they think about the steroid era, Clemens shows that the problem went far beyond just the players swinging the bats. Clemens was one of the most dominant pitchers of his generation. He won games at a level that very few pitchers in history ever reached. And he did it for a very long time. His name became tied to the Mitchell Report, a major investigation into performance-enhancing drugs in baseball. Once his name was connected to that report, Clemens did not respond the way some players did. He fought back hard. He took a defensive approach in public, and he stuck to denials even as the pressure grew. This eventually led him into congressional hearings, where lawmakers questioned him directly about his past. It did not stop there. Clemens faced federal prosecution related to statements he made about his history with performance-enhancing drugs. A criminal case is about as serious as it gets for an athlete, and it showed just how far this story had traveled from the baseball field. To this day, Clemens remains outside of the Hall of Fame, despite having the kind of statistics that would normally guarantee a spot for almost any other player in history. His case sends a clear message. The steroid era did not just change how people felt about home runs. It changed how people felt about pitching, too. It changed how people felt about trust in the entire sport, from the mound to the batter's box. There is something almost ironic about Clemens being on this list right alongside so many sluggers. For years, a lot of fans assumed that performance-enhancing drugs were mostly a hitter's problem, something that helped a player swing harder and hit the ball further. Clemens showed that the same temptation existed on the other side of the ball. A pitcher who can stay stronger for longer, recover faster between starts, and keep his velocity up late into a season has a massive advantage over everyone he faces. When his name became tied to the Mitchell Report, it forced a lot of fans to rethink games they had watched for years. Was that strikeout late in a game the result of pure skill, or was something else helping that arm stay fresh deep into the season? Clemens chose to fight that question instead of answering it honestly, and the legal fallout that followed, including congressional hearings and a federal case over false statements, turned his story into one of the most public and most damaging in this entire era. Even now, when his name comes up, the conversation almost always circles back to those hearings and that defensive posture, rather than just the long list of records he once held. There is a lesson in that for anyone trying to understand how these stories play out over time. The original achievement, no matter how impressive, often ends up taking a back seat to how the person handled getting caught. Clemens had decades of dominance on the mound, enough to make him an easy Hall of Fame choice under normal circumstances. Yet ask most fans today what they remember most about him, and the answer is rarely about a specific game or a specific pitch. It is almost always about the hearings, the denials, and the legal trouble that followed. That shift, from remembering the performance to remembering the response, shows up again and again throughout this list. Number 3 on this list is Barry Bonds. And if there is one name that became the face of the entire steroid era, it is his. Bonds was already one of the best players in baseball before his name became connected to performance-enhancing drugs. But in the later years of his career, his numbers grew in a way that shocked everyone, including longtime fans who had watched baseball their whole lives. His name became tied to Balco, a sports training facility that became the center of a major investigation into PEDs in professional sports. Substances known as the cream and the clear became part of the story, and Bonds was right at the center of it. Unlike some of the other names on this list, Bonds chose the path of denial. He did not offer the kind of public admission that some other players eventually gave. He held his position, even as the legal pressure grew around him. That pressure eventually led to a federal indictment, with charges connected to perjury and obstruction of justice. These are serious legal terms that basically mean lying under oath and getting in the way of an official investigation. For a player with Bonds' level of talent, the fall was massive. He holds some of the most famous offensive records in baseball history, including the all-time home run record. But instead of being celebrated as one of the greatest hitters ever, his name often gets mentioned with words like controversy and asterisk. To this day, he remains completely excluded from the National Baseball Hall of Fame, despite having the statistics of a clear first-ballot legend. The number still exists in the record books. Anyone can look it up, but the trust that should come with a record like that never fully arrived. Fans watched greatness with their own eyes, and many of them later felt like they had been watching something that was not entirely real. What makes Bonds such a difficult case for fans is that he was already an all-time great before any of this started. Long before his name became connected to Balco, he had already won multiple awards as the best player in the league, and he was already a clear future Hall of Famer based purely on the first part of his career. So the question with Bonds is not whether he had talent. Nobody doubts that. The question is what to do with the second half of his career, the part where his body changed dramatically, and his power numbers jumped to levels that no player his age had ever reached before. For some fans, that second half simply cannot be separated from the first half, and the entire body of work becomes impossible to fully trust. For others, the early years still deserve recognition on their own. Either way, Bonds chose denial over admission at almost every turn, and that choice is part of why his name still carries so much weight in arguments about cheating, trust, and the Hall of Fame, even many years after he last stepped onto a baseball field. There is also something worth noticing about the timing of Bonds' rise. His best statistical seasons came after he was already an established star in his mid-30s, an age when most players are starting to decline rather than suddenly reaching new heights. That pattern, a player getting noticeably bigger and stronger and putting up better numbers later in his career instead of earlier, became one of the clearest warning signs fans and reporters started looking for during this whole era. Once people knew what to look for, they started looking backward too, rechecking other careers for the same pattern. Bonds became the most famous example of that pattern, but he was far from the only one, and his case helped shape how an entire generation of fans learned to read a baseball career with a more skeptical eye. Number 2 on this list is not a single player. It is an entire team, and it might be the most modern example of cheating on this whole list. The Houston Astros. Most of the other cases on this list involve substances entering a player's body. The Astros case is different. It was not hidden inside anyone's body. It was built into how the team operated. Major League Baseball confirmed that the Astros ran an illegal electronic sign stealing operation during their championship season in 2017. This was not a single player making a quick decision in the moment. This was a coordinated effort that used technology to capture and decode the signals that opposing catchers were sending to their pitchers. And it happened in real time during games. Think about what that means. A pitcher and catcher try to stay one step ahead of the batter by using secret signals. If a team on the other side of the field can figure out those signals as the game is happening, the batter suddenly knows what is coming before it arrives. That is not a small advantage. That can change the outcome of a game, a series, or even a championship. When this story became public, the consequences landed mostly on the people in charge. Field managers were suspended and later fired because of their role in the scandal. But here is where this case becomes strange, and where Alex Rodriguez himself stepped into the conversation. Because of league immunity agreements, no active players actually faced punishment for their part in the scandal. A-Rod went on ESPN and criticized the Astros directly for what he saw as a lack of remorse. He pointed out the contrast between what happened to him and what happened to them. He lost more than $35 million and an entire season because of his own cheating scandal. The Astros players who benefited from a high-tech cheating scheme during a championship season walked away from it with their championship still standing and no suspensions of their own. A-Rod was not wrong to point this out. The gap between those two outcomes is real, and fans noticed it too. But there is something strange about the man who once fought MLB, sued the league, and called the commissioner a chicken, now criticizing another group of people for not showing enough remorse. It is not that he is incorrect. It is that he, of all people, knows exactly what it looks like when someone tries to deny, fight, and move past a cheating scandal without fully owning it. Fans noticed the same thing A-Rod noticed, even before he said it on television. A championship is supposed to be the proudest moment of an entire organization, the thing players talk about for the rest of their lives, and the thing a city celebrates for years afterward. When that championship becomes linked to a cheating scandal, it puts everyone connected to that season in an awkward position. Did every player on that roster know exactly what was happening? Did some players use the stolen signs more than others? Those questions may never be fully answered, and that uncertainty is part of what makes this case feel so frustrating to fans. With drug scandals, there is at least a test result or an admission to point to. With a scheme built around technology and shared information in real time, the lines are blurrier, and the punishment ended up landing almost entirely on the people at the top of the organization rather than the players on the field. That gap between what fans felt should happen and what actually happened is exactly why this case still gets brought up constantly years after it became public. It is also exactly why A-Rod, with his own history, was such a noticeable voice to bring it up on national television. There is also a generational angle to this case that connects it back to everything else on this list. Fans who lived through the steroid era already knew what it felt like to find out that a celebrated achievement had an asterisk attached to it. When the Astros story broke, a lot of those same fans recognized the pattern immediately. A team wins big, fans celebrate, and then later it comes out that something behind the scenes was not what it seemed. The difference this time was speed. With the steroid era, it often took years for the full picture to come out, sometimes a decade or more after the moments themselves happened. With the Astros, the story broke relatively quickly, and the league response came fairly fast as well. In some ways, that is progress. In other ways, it just proved that the temptation to find any edge possible never really went away. It just changed shape, moving from chemistry to technology. For fans who had already lived through one wave of disappointment, watching it happen again in a different form did not feel surprising. It just felt familiar. Number one on this list is Alex Rodriguez himself, and his story is the one that ties this entire countdown together. Before anything else, it is worth remembering just how good Alex Rodriguez actually was. He was drafted first overall as a teenager and quickly became known as a generational talent. The kind of player who comes around once every few decades. After becoming a star with the Seattle Mariners, he signed a record-breaking 10-year contract worth $252 million with the Texas Rangers. At the time, that contract was unlike anything baseball had ever seen. It made him the highest-paid player in the sport by a wide margin, and it placed an enormous amount of pressure on him to perform at a level that matched that price tag. This is where the first part of his story begins. During his years with the the Rangers, Rodriguez was introduced to a substance through his cousin, something obtained over the counter and known by names like Boli or Blee. He has said that he believed it was simply an energy booster, something harmless that would help him keep up with the demands of being baseball's highest paid player. In reality, the substance involved was primobolan, along with testosterone, both performance-enhancing drugs. This usage led to a positive result on a confidential survey test that Major League Baseball conducted in 2003. For a while, this stayed hidden, but years later, after that confidential list was leaked, Rodriguez admitted to his Rangers-era use during an interview. The problem was that this admission directly contradicted something he had said earlier on national television, when he had flatly denied ever using banned substances. So now, the public was not just dealing with a player who had used performance-enhancing drugs. They were dealing with a player who had also lied about it on camera. At the time, many fans were willing to give him some room because the era itself was loosely regulated, and plenty of players were caught up in similar stories. It felt, to some people, like an old mistake from a different time. Then came the second part of the story, and this is the part that changed everything. In 2013, Major League Baseball connected Rodriguez to a clinic run by a man named Anthony Bosch, known as biogenesis. This was not an old mistake from years earlier. This was a much more recent program, one that pointed to ongoing use between 2010 and 2012. The single mistake explanation no longer made sense. This was not a young player making a bad choice under pressure. This was an established veteran continuing to break the rules long after his first scandal had already happened. Rodriguez did not respond quietly. He fought the league aggressively. He stormed out of arbitration hearings. He sued Major League Baseball. He publicly called the commissioner of baseball a chicken. Longtime respected figures in the sport criticized his approach harshly, with some calling his actions against his own players' union pathetic. In the end, his suspension was reduced from over 200 games down to 162 games. But that still meant he missed an entire season and lost more than $35 million in salary. That number alone tells you how serious this punishment was. It remains one of the longest suspensions in the history of the sport. So now you can understand why Alex Rodriguez is such a complicated figure to put at number one on this list. He can talk about cheaters because he lived inside the era that created them. He understands the pressure, the temptation, and the excuses better than almost anyone alive. But he also became one of the most famous examples of exactly what this video is about. And yet, after everything, Rodriguez did something that almost none of the other names on this list managed to do. He came back. He became a respected television voice on some of the biggest baseball broadcasts in the country. He has openly said that he served the longest suspension in baseball history, that it cost him more than $35 million, that he deserved it, and that he came back and owned it. Compare that to Bonds and Clemens, who mostly stuck to denial and pushing back, and who remain locked outside the Hall of Fame to this day. A-Rod chose a different path. He admitted the damage, said the words people wanted to hear, and let the public watch him accept it. Networks were willing to give him a second chance because he was polished, sharp, and easy to listen to on air. This is the most important lesson in this entire story. The public may never fully forgive the act itself, but the public can sometimes accept the performance of regret if it feels honest enough. A-Rod learned that lesson. Many of the other names on this list never did. Look at the difference between his path and the paths taken by Bonds and Clemens. Both of those players had Hall of Fame numbers, the same as Rodriguez. Both of those players faced serious accusations, the same as Rodriguez. But both of those players spent years denying, fighting, and refusing to give the public the kind of moment that Rodriguez eventually gave. Rodriguez stood in front of cameras, said the suspension was deserved, said the dollar amount out loud, and said he owned it. That single choice, more than any single statistic, is probably the biggest reason his career took a completely different direction after baseball than theirs did. It does not erase what he did. It does not make the lying disappear, especially the part where he denied everything on national television years before admitting it. But it shows how much the public response to a scandal can depend on what happens after the scandal, not just during it. Rodriguez figured that out. He turned the worst chapter of his career into the foundation of his second career. And television networks were more than happy to let him do it, because audiences responded to it. By 2018, Rodriguez had become a regular face on Sunday Night Baseball broadcasts and a featured analyst for one of the biggest sports networks in the country. Think about how unusual that actually is. A few years earlier, he had been suspended for an entire season, sued his own league, and was widely seen as one of the least trusted men in baseball. Then, in a fairly short amount of time, he became one of the most recognizable voices explaining the sport to millions of viewers every week. Part of that came down to genuine skill. Rodriguez understands the game at a deep level, and he is comfortable and confident on camera. But part of it also came down to timing and tone. He arrived on television ready to talk about his past openly, rather than avoiding it, and that openness became part of his appeal, rather than something that held him back. Viewers got used to hearing him reference his own suspension as a kind of credibility, almost like a lesson learned the hard way that gave him the right to analyze other players honestly. Whether or not that is completely fair, it worked. And it is a big part of why his name still carries weight in baseball conversations today, for reasons that go beyond what he did on the field. Now that we have gone through all 6, it is worth stepping back and talking about something bigger than any single player or team. Sports researchers have a name for what happened to fans during this whole era. They call it the cheated generation. These are the fans who grew up watching these moments live. They cheered for the home runs, they believed in the records, they bought the jerseys and the trading cards and told their friends they were watching history. Then, years later, many of them had to go back and look at those same memories with new eyes. Was that home run real? Was that record fair? Was that superstar honest with us the whole time? Were the players who stayed clean during this era robbed of the recognition they deserved because they were competing against people who were not playing by the same rules? Different fans reacted to this in different ways. Some fans believe the answer is simple. If a player cheated, especially through performance-enhancing drugs, then their records and their honors should not count the same way. This is part of why players like Bonds, Clemens, and Rodriguez remain outside the Hall of Fame, even with numbers that would otherwise make the decision easy. For these fans, allowing cheaters into the highest honors of the sport would be unfair to the players who competed clean during an era when cheating was common all around them. Other fans went a different direction. They became more cynical. Their attitude became something like, everybody was doing it, so what is the point of being angry at any one player? Some point out that earlier generations of baseball also used substances to gain an edge, even if those substances were different and less advanced. From this view, cheating becomes almost normal, just another part of how competitive sports work at the highest level. But here is the problem with that second reaction. Saying everybody was doing it does not actually defend anyone. It does not make the cheating fair. It does not give back the trust that fans lost. All it really proves is that the system itself was broken from top to bottom, and that almost nobody inside it was willing to stop it on their own. The cheated generation is not just about disappointment in a few players. It is about an entire era where fans were sold something that looked perfect and later found out how much of it was built on lies, technology, and substances that were never supposed to be part of the game. There is another part of this that often gets overlooked. A lot of fans grew up collecting cards, watching highlight shows, and memorizing stats from this era. Those memories do not just disappear because new information came out years later. Instead, those memories sit there with a strange feeling attached to them now. A mix of nostalgia and doubt at the same time. A fan can still remember exactly where they were when they watched one of these moments happen, and still feel that old excitement, while also knowing now what was going on behind the scenes. That mix of feelings is exactly what makes this era so different from earlier eras of cheating in baseball. Corked bats and sign stealing with a pair of binoculars from the dugout feel almost old-fashioned compared to coordinated drug programs and electronic systems built to break down signals in real time. The scale of it is what changed everything. It stopped being a story about one player bending the rules and became a story about an entire system that allowed, and in some cases encouraged, that kind of behavior for years before anyone was held accountable. So where does that leave us? Let's be honest about something first. Every name on this list had real talent. Alex Rodriguez was a generational hitter long before any of his scandals happened. Barry Bonds was one of the most feared hitters who ever stepped into a batter's box. Roger Clemens dominated hitters for 2 decades. Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa gave an entire country something to believe in during one unforgettable summer. The Houston Astros had a roster full of genuinely skilled players, championship or no championship. And Pete Rose built a legacy so big and so respected that his fall from the game still matters to people decades later. None of that talent is fake. None of those skills were created by a substance or a piece of technology. These were gifted athletes. And that part of the story is real. But talent does not erase cheating. Greatness on the field does not erase lying off of it. A record in a book does not erase the broken trust that fans felt when the truth came out. And saying sorry years later, even if it sounds sincere, does not make the original damage disappear. Maybe that is exactly why Alex Rodriguez ended up being the right person to walk fans through this list. He is not standing outside of this story, pointing fingers from a safe distance. He lived through almost every part of it. He knows what it feels like to deny something on national television. He knows what it feels like to get caught a second time after promising it would never happen again. He knows what it feels like to fight, to lose, and to lose a fortune along with it. And he also knows what it feels like to come back, admit it all, and slowly earn a second chance in front of millions of people. Baseball can forgive. Television can forgive. A lot of fans can forgive, especially when enough time has passed. But baseball history does not work quite the same way. It keeps everything. The home runs, the records, the suspensions, the denials, and the apologies all stay written down side by side forever. And that might be the most honest thing anyone in this story has ever said. The next time you watch an old highlight from this era, maybe a towering home run from 1998, or a dominant strikeout from a pitcher in his prime, or even a championship celebration from a team that later got caught, try holding both feelings at once. The excitement that fans felt in that exact moment was real. Nobody can take that feeling away after the fact. But the full story behind that moment is more complicated than it looked on the night it happened. And pretending otherwise does not help anyone understand the sport better. That is really what this whole list comes down to. Not a simple list of villains to boo, and not a free pass because everyone else was doing something similar too. Just 6 clear examples of how talent, pressure, technology, and the desire to win can combine to create moments that thrilled millions of people, while quietly breaking the very thing that made those moments matter in the first place. Alex Rodriguez gets to stand at the center of that story, not because he is the worst example, and not because he is the best example of coming back from one, but because he is the rare person who has truly lived both sides of it. He cheated, he lied about it, he got caught twice, and he still found a way to sit in front of a camera years later and talk about all of it, calmly, as part of his job. That contradiction is the whole point. Baseball gave fans heroes during this era, and then slowly took some of them away, one confession and one investigation at a time. What is left is a more complicated picture than anyone wanted back when these moments were first happening, but it might also be a more honest one.